So this HOA president literally kicks down my cabin door right when I'm having a beer with the state's attorney general. She just committed 6 felonies in front of the one person in America who could throw her ass in prison. I'm talking full-on wood splintering, designer heels clicking on broken glass, the whole 9 yards. This woman in her thousand blazer, reeking of that aggressive perfume that probably costs more than my truck payment, storms into my grandfather's cabin, screaming about violations and jurisdiction like she owns the place. Zero clue who she just barged in on. Zero clue she's live streaming her own arrest warrant to 3,000 followers. 6 months earlier, I thought Karen was just your typical power-drunk neighbor. Turns out she was running a $4 million embezzlement scheme, and I was about to accidentally burn her entire criminal empire to the ground. What would you do if some HOA psychopath invaded your private property during the most important meeting of your life? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I guarantee half of you have dealt with these neighborhood dictators before. Let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started. 6 months ago, life was pretty damn good. My name is Marcus Henley. I'm 52. And after 30 years of crawling through muddy trenches, installing power grids across 3 counties, I'd finally earned my retirement. The crown jewel, my grandfather's fishing cabin on Clearwater Lake, 2 acres of pure heaven that old Pop bought back in 1963 for $800. Can you believe that? $800 for lakefront property that's now worth more than most people's houses. This wasn't some fancy McMansion, mind you. We're talking hand-hewn logs, a stone fireplace that Pop built with his own calloused hands, and a screened porch that creaked in all the right places. I'd kept it completely off-grid by choice, solar panels humming quietly on the roof, well water that tasted like childhood memories, and a septic system that actually worked better than most city setups. The morning mist rising off the lake each day reminded me why Pop chose this spot. He used to say, "The land picks you, not the other way around." Smart man. He also used to say, "Marcus, when someone wants your land real bad, find out why, because it's usually worth more than they're telling you." Then she showed up. Delilah Cromwell, though everyone just called her that HOA psycho, rolled into our peaceful lake community like a tornado in designer clothing. 58 years old, fresh out of some California subdivision where apparently running a neighborhood dictatorship was considered real work. She drove a pearl-white Escalade with vanity plates that literally read Rule 1, and she wore her HOA president badge on her blazer like it was a sheriff's star. Her mission was simple: transform our rustic lakefront into what she called an upscale resort community. Now here's the kicker. What none of us knew at the time was that 3 elderly couples had already sold their cabins to interested buyers within 2 months of her arrival. The Hendersons, the Brooks, and the McLeans all gone in a flash. Funny coincidence, right? Except coincidences like that don't happen by accident. Her first act of war came on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting on Pop's porch sipping coffee, watching a pair of loons teach their babies to dive when I heard the sharp clicking of heels on my dock. 7 a.m. on my private property. 10 minutes later, she taped an official-looking notice to my screen door. Violation citation. Unsightly dock structure damaging community property values. Fine, $500. Compliance required within 72 hours or daily penalties would accrue. I had to read it twice. My weathered dock, the same one Pop and I reinforced together when I was 12, was apparently an eyesore threatening the entire neighborhood's real estate market. Now, being a reasonable man, I walked over to explain that my property actually predated the HOA by about 40 years. You know what she said to me, standing there in my own driveway with her hands on her hips like she owned the place? "Everyone on this lake answers to me, sweetie. Ask the Hendersons how well fighting me worked out for them." The Hendersons, my elderly neighbors who'd mysteriously decided to downsize last month after 23 years of lake living. The pieces weren't clicking yet, but something cold settled in my stomach. Then she pulled out her phone and started circling my cabin, snapping pictures of my solar panels, my vegetable garden, even the porch railing Pop hand carved. The chemical reek of her Escalade's air freshener drifted over and made me gag. By the end of that week, I had 3 more citations. Each one came with escalating fines. Each one made it crystal clear. Delilah Cromwell had declared war on everything my family had built on this land. At first, I thought it was just power games, typical HOA nonsense. But then the letters started coming. Thick envelopes marked final warning and legal action pending. Each one was signed not just by Delilah, but by a law firm out of Sacramento. That's when Pop's words came back to me, echoing like thunder. Find out why they want your land real bad, Marcus, because it's worth more than they're telling you. And sure enough, I was about to find out why. One night I sat at the old oak desk in the cabin with those letters spread out like a losing poker hand. Something didn't add up. These weren't just generic HOA threats. The legal wording, the pressure tactics, the sudden exodus of longtime neighbors, it all felt orchestrated. So I did what any stubborn old lineman would do. I started digging. A quick search of the law firm's name turned up almost nothing. No website, no directory listing, no bar association record. But buried deep in a news archive from 2017, I found a single article mentioning them as consultants tied to a controversial real estate development firm out of Reno. Same Reno firm that had been buying up distressed lake properties across the state, flipping them into eco-resorts for Silicon Valley weekenders. That's when the hair on my arm stood up. Delilah wasn't just a power-tripping neighbor, she was a plant. A hired bulldog sent in to squeeze out anyone who wouldn't sell. And my grandfather's cabin, our family's land, was sitting dead center on the blueprint of their next luxury resort. The next morning I drove into town, straight to the county clerk's office. I wanted to see with my own eyes if anything shady was happening with deeds and transfers, and wouldn't you know it? There they were, 3 property transfers, all within the last 60 days, all purchased under a shell LLC tied back to that Reno firm. But here's the kicker. The Hendersons, the Brooks, the McLeans, they hadn't downsized, they'd been forced out. Each one of them sold under threat of mounting fines, lawsuits, and foreclosure. The sale prices? Barely half of what those cabins were worth. By the time I drove back to the lake, my jaw was clenched so tight I could taste blood. That afternoon, Delilah was already waiting in my driveway like some kind of cartoon villain. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses that probably cost more than my first car, and a smug little smile. "Mr. Henley," she purred, "I'm here to inform you that your noncompliance has reached a critical stage. If you don't agree to sign over management rights, we'll be forced to escalate." I laughed right in her face. Not the kind of laugh you give when something's funny, the kind of laugh you give when you've just realized someone thinks you're dumber than you look. "Lady," I said, "this cabin's been here since before you were born. My grandfather built it with his bare hands. If you think for 1 second I'm signing anything, you've lost your damn mind." Her smile cracked just a little. That was the first time I saw the mask slip, and beneath it I caught a glimpse of the desperation. Because bullies like her? They don't push this hard unless someone higher up is breathing down their neck. That night I knew 2 things for certain. 1. My land was worth more than I could imagine. 2nd, Delilah Cromwell would rather bury me than let me keep it. And that, right there, was the beginning of the real war. Things only got darker from there. Over the next 2 months, Delilah turned up the heat. She sent contractors to inspect my property without notice. She filed false noise complaints when I was alone on the porch, drinking coffee in silence. And when that didn't break me, she tried intimidation. Strange cars idling at the end of my drive, anonymous letters slipped under my cabin door at night. But she made one fatal mistake. She underestimated the old lineman who'd spent 3 decades tracing power surges and following buried lines. I knew how to track patterns, and every pattern pointed straight back to her. With the help of a buddy at the state utilities office, I dug through financial filings tied to her HOA improvement fund. What I found made my blood run cold. $4 million siphoned through shell accounts, laundered clean under the guise of community development. It wasn't just harassment, it was organized fraud on a scale big enough to put her behind bars for life. So I set a trap. One Friday evening, I invited a guest up to the cabin, not a neighbor, not a friend. The state's attorney general himself, an old hunting buddy of mine from way back. We sat by the fire, 2 beers in hand, quietly going over the stack of evidence I'd collected: bank statements, fake invoices, property transfers, every thread tied back to Delilah Cromwell. And right then, as if summoned by her own arrogance, Delilah came storming across my yard. High heels crunching over gravel, perfume hitting my nose before the screen door even opened. Without warning, she kicked that door in like a SWAT raid and marched into my living room. "You're in violation," she shrieked. "This property is under HOA seizure authority." Except this time, she wasn't just screaming at me. She was screaming at the top lawman in the state, who calmly set down his beer, pulled out his badge, and said, "Ma'am, do you have any idea how many felonies you just committed?" Her face went pale. She tried to backpedal, stammering about community bylaws and jurisdiction, but it was too late. She'd hung herself with her own rope. Within 24 hours, the feds were combing through her records. Within a week, the entire embezzlement scheme collapsed. Delilah Cromwell, queen of the HOA, tyrant of the lake, was led out of our community in handcuffs, her pearl-white Escalade impounded, her empire reduced to ashes. As for me, I still wake up every morning to the mist rising over Clearwater Lake. I still sit on Pop's porch with a cup of coffee, watching the loons teach their young to dive, and I still hear his voice every now and then, whispering that old truth. The land picks you, Marcus, and when it does, you fight like hell to keep it. So that's exactly what I did, and I'd do it again.